Hi, the world's most wicked problems need innovative solutions. Join me in this show to meet leaders, pathbreakers, and visionaries who've solved these problems. Not just solved them, but they've solved it at scale. When you join me, you're going to listen to their lives, the problems they solved, and the fun they had doing it. Hello, welcome to the Wicked Solutions Show, where you will be meeting some amazing human beings who solve some of the world's most complex problems. Not only do they solve it, they do that innovatively and at scale. Today, before I invite my host for the day, I have a co-host, Ms. Shama Karkal, who's been my colleague and friend for 16 years. And she's a BA in Arts and did a post-graduation in Community Institution Building, which is a very unique course. And she does the community institution building for the last 2 decades. Shama's qualifications is one part, but she's an ardent lover of well-being for herself, her family, and for the communities. And most importantly, she's a great lover of the planet and the animals in it. And it would be not correct if I also don't add in she's a runner, a snake catcher, and many, many things. And most of all, an amazing parent to watch and learn from. Shama, thank you for joining me as the co-host today. As I invite our guest for the day, Ms. Sangita Patel, who works at the USAID. Sangeetha has an illustrious career of 2 decades, and she's a master's in public health. And she's worked across the world, particularly countries like Pakistan, Namibia, and currently in India. And it's a pleasure to welcome you, Sangeetha. Thank you for joining us. I hope to have a conversation to know you as a person, your work, and the problems you're solving.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. Sangeetha, let's begin by understanding the person. What makes you you? What makes Sangeetha both the package, the person and the professional?
Thanks for asking, Shiv. It's a pleasure to be here and really amazing to be a part of your Wicked Solutions. I'm honored. What makes me me, I guess, is just a product and part and parcel of just being raised in a multicultural environment. In case you're not aware, I am also Indian. I grew up in a household that's very Gujarati and also was raised, though, in the United States. And so I had the mix of East and West. And so I suppose what makes me who I am is a part and parcel of that dual culture and experiencing both from childhood and surviving.
Wonderful. So do you call yourself an Indian American or an American Indian?
Oh my goodness. I call myself a human being. And I think I never think of myself as Indian American or American Indian, but just really just someone who is benefited from both and is excited really to be a part of change.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sangeetha, talking about your work, could you give us a kind of a quick journey, what all kinds of things you did, both formally and informally? Because I know somebody like you must be having colorful sides which people need to know, both in your work and what you wouldn't call work, more as a passion.
So my journey, I think, of course, as I alluded to earlier, started in the United States. Well, I was first born in the UK, then transitioned to the US and grew up in the United States in both the American as well as Indian culture and context. And I think that that has shaped who I am. I, from a young age, knew that I had a passion for languages, loved travel, loved also developing countries. My parents made a point to always come to India every summer, and so I would spend months at a time here. And I think that inspired me from a young age to want to do more, to be more than just a visitor, but to actually engage in meaningful work in countries where I felt that we could partner and we could make a difference. And I think early on, I did the equivalent, I think, of what is done in India as well, but I did Peace Corps, which was a unique volunteer opportunity to work in a developing country. So I lived and worked in Madagascar for 2 years, and then that just kind of inspired me to really be at the grassroots And I was lucky enough to land a job at USAID. And from there, really, I've been able to pursue that passion of living and working overseas as a Foreign Service officer in developing countries, and really just pursuing all manner of development work, ultimately to be able to make a meaningful difference and to reach the most marginalized.
Right. Yeah. And in your career, the fact that you're a global citizen, have the advantage of the multiculturalism which is there. Do you also struggle with it sometimes in terms of the layered identities that one finds advantages sometimes? The Gujarati in you, the Indian culture and the American culture, does it also come in the way sometimes?
I think it always does. I mean, I think that what I have really learned through life is to take advantage of both, and I think that in some cases from a gender perspective, all right, I found very much like growing up that, I was told what the role of a woman should be, whom I should marry, what education I should or should not pursue. And so for me personally, what I realized was that I had to understand that in the context of where that was coming from, but then also appreciate that I was growing up in the United States and that I could have access to an education, that I could pursue my dreams, that I could, indeed not have an arranged marriage. And really, I think as a result of that, while I faced that duality, I also tried to overcome it by knowing how to access what were my rights, in a respectful way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your core compass, what drives you directionally, and could you give us examples of the people and some of the experiences which kind of gave you that Sangeetha, the core?
Oh my goodness. I think that the most impressionable experiences that I have had throughout my career, especially with USAID, but even personally, what has impacted me the most is, I think, living in Pakistan and actually trying to work within a context where there were so many cultural barriers.
Right.
Ultimately, to be able to ensure equity and access, especially to women, of basic services. And for me, really, during that time, I actually studied yoga, and I got certified in yoga. And so I think what really influenced my life was having this education and also access to an instructor who had been trained in India in Hatha Yoga. And so I got to at least experience yoga and Ayurveda and pranayama and really start to understand how to be more centered as a person, how to focus on health and wellness, but also how to give back to others. So that really influenced me, and so did, along the way in my journey at USAID, really having incredible coaches and mentors that were able to guide me. And so as a result, I wanted to do the same. And so I also pursued coaching certification, and now I do the same as well. But these are the kinds of people that left a lasting influence on my life and kind of made me who I am.
Right. Yeah. That's the commonality between all three of us is yoga and pranayama.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm probably the lesser one here. Both of you practice it probably far more.
Sangeetha is certified. I'm not, though I have done it for years. But I think, yes, there is something about that centering and using the breath work, I think, to bring things together that makes a difference. So.
Definitely.
Yeah. But I have, you mentioned in places where women and girls don't have the opportunities, and which you had, and you were able to utilize it well, and you want to help others. Yeah. Sangeetha, is the drive for you hope, or is it anger that this should change, or is it I have the agency, therefore I would use it for others? What really drives you there?
My goodness, it's ages and stages. I think in my youth I was driven by anger and activism and the need to say no. So what if every person in my family has had an arranged marriage? I don't need to do the same. I don't need to follow in those footsteps. But I think through time as well, it's come as well with agency, with gradually rising in my career, and now as a senior foreign service officer with USAID, and knowing that I'm able to at least, influence and impact different areas and in a meaningful way. Right now, for instance, USAID is really, and so is the State Department as well as U.S. government, very keen on reinforcing and delivering on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, not only in the workplace, but also in our programs. And so for someone like me, with now that agency, as well as that understanding from a cultural perspective, it's allowed me to really pursue opportunities, not only in our programs, but also, of course, in the workplace to ensure that rights are respected. But I think that journey really has come from that activism, but also eventually having the ability to influence,
And what would your advice to 18-year-old Sangita Patel be?
Oh my goodness. I think I wouldn't have changed the path that I have taken. At that age, I was, trying to figure out what to be, who to become, what were the possibilities. And, I think that I always had in mind, pursue your passion. I had an incredible career counselor at that time. And she said, look, don't just do something because someone wants you to. Do it because it's a passion, because something in you says that this is, intrinsically part of what you want to do and what makes you feel alive. And so I think at that time that was, learning languages, in that case it was French, and it was also understanding more about health. In my case it was biology. But I never wanted to be on the clinical end. And so that's how I used both passions to pursue, ultimately, public health.
So Sangeetha, you mentioned coaching and something that you actually certified in. And I'm wondering, when you came into USAID, did you have a coach? Did you have somebody mentor you? Because you've had a long journey within USAID as well. And I'm curious what that has been like.
I think that at various stages I've had mentors who have been phenomenal, and I've had mentors as well who I could look to and to ask questions. But I think the coaching really came into play as I pursued more leadership opportunities and really, was aligned with USAID's philosophy of really ensuring leadership at all levels. So through many of the leadership courses that I pursued, I was able to access coaching. And I was so inspired by one of my coaches, not only through that program, but actually in India. When we went through the COVID pandemic, there was an incredible, inspiring individual who I worked with, and also ended up working with my team. His name is Sanjay Jaganti. And he was someone who I really was inspired by. He actually allowed us to find those threads of resilience and happiness during the pandemic, and in an environment where we were all of a sudden scattered. And I felt like that cohesion is actually what allowed my team and me to survive. And I think I owe it to him, because after having benefited from coaching in USAID, and then also having benefited and been inspired by him, I was like, hey, I've got to do this. I've got to pursue getting training in this and try and do the same for others.
So I actually have a follow-on question for you, because we were talking earlier that you are a coach now. You're a certified coach, and you also coach other women, especially, in your organization. And I'm curious, what are some of the common things that come up as challenges for women? Is it very professional, or what kind of issues do you see?
I see a lot of different challenges, because whether I work with men or even women, one thing that always comes up is the whole person, because how we show up in life isn't just about what our professional needs are or what's bothering us in the workplace, but also stems from who we are as a person and ultimately behaviors that might also be occurring in the home as well. And so what I find is that in coaching, some of the challenges that occur, like time management or prioritization, or even issues such as not being able to, handle all that comes up in a crisis situation, can also be linked to how do you show up as a person in the home? Are you able to, prioritize? Do you know what matters? And I think that my coaching has always been about trying to allow a person to really take a pause, right? Because everything comes at us, so quickly. So in that pranayama and that yoga and that meditation, we are able to do through these ancient practices, that pause and reflect. And I think that nowadays it's so hard to do that I try to find that space in coaching to do that. And I think people have the solutions inside and they just need them to come out. And so that's what I usually do.
Yeah, and I think that's another common thing amongst us that, we're not certified, but I think we've all experienced the power of coaching for ourselves. And
coming to the main subject of the show,
yes,
moving Sangeetha into the realm of complex problem solving. What are the really wicked problems that you and your agency is trying to solve? And could you give us a couple of examples for us to understand which problem you picked, why, and how you went about doing it?
Well, this is a difficult question because I also benefited through my agency from training with the U.S. Army War College, and so in strategic studies. And so one of the things that I had pursued during that time was really understanding the magnitude of challenges that are facing us globally. And I feel like if we bring it back to India, I think that what I have found here, at least in my work in India, is the complexity and multiplicity of challenges that come at once. It's when it rains, it rains. And it's like whether it's COVID or even at that same time essential health services, or even during that crisis, climate change. Or even challenges with energy, with access to education, all of these areas. I feel like what really is the crux of what we do at USAID is about meeting where the country is and trying to work together to solve those challenges together. And I feel like in India, it's ebbs and flows, right? When it was the time of the second wave of the pandemic, it was a time to come in with emergency relief. When we moved on from that stage to a time when globally the world needed vaccines, the country, India, stepped up to the plate to manufacture, and USAID worked with COVAX and other facilities to figure out how to get vaccines to those countries most in need. But I think that it's the complexity of these multiple threats that we face that I also learned in my strategic studies at the War College, which really do impact us as global citizens and put us in situations where we can't just look at one thing in an isolated manner, such as the COVID pandemic. We've got to really look at, writ large, the overall situation, and in that situation, what can we influence? Where can we partner to manage those onslaught of challenges, and also where might we be of benefit globally. And I feel like many times during this crisis, India as a country, but even the U.S. government and the government of India have been able to partner together really to ultimately bring relief, not only domestically, but also in other countries. Yeah.
And it was under your leadership that significant financing was brought in by USAID, if I'm not wrong, around $300 million of cash and in kind into India. And this was done under your leadership, and you were there when COVID hit the world. But in India, luckily for us, large agencies need prioritization and a lot of accountability. And countries like India, priorities shift.
Absolutely.
Very, very fast. How did you manage the tension, Sangeetha?
It's so difficult, because I was a leader by position, and the resources were a gift from our United States Congress and the Indian diaspora, because they recognize a great need here. Right. And so it was emergency funding, and we were able to provide support where we could in partnership with the government of India, but also a lot of the resources that remained were able to really be put to technical assistance. Right. And I think that the government of India has been so progressive. Like, I cannot emphasize how progressive the government has been here through Ayushman Bharat, through the Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission, through emergency response resources at the state level, and really ultimately even in forward thinking in the Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission and other areas. I feel like we as the USAID have just been running to try and ensure that we can be as flexible as possible in those areas. So while our funding has been very much for COVID, we've also tried to see through those flexibilities how we can also support ensuring that there are systems that are, really strengthened, and that ultimately we can partner together to leverage even more funding and or even more capabilities and address the last mile. So I think, it has been a real challenge, and I'm not going to say that everything is perfect, because part of the challenge is when you create so many incredible partnerships, and then at the end of that funding, you're trying to figure out, well, what next? What's the transition? How can we ensure that this partnership doesn't just collapse, but that there are other means to continue the incredible work? Right. So while we've been able to in many ways support critical care, to support essential services, to reach the last mile, to really promote equity, access to the most vulnerable, I feel like we've also at the same time really set the momentum to encourage continued collaboration between the public, the private sector, across the U.S. government, government of India, across multiple stakeholders. And I think really in any kind of situation, especially as dynamic as in India, we stand to gain from working together, from not just ending abruptly, but also from figuring out ways to share with others. I see no greater gift that India could leave even to the world than in areas like comprehensive primary health care, in traditional practices such as Ayurveda and, wellness and healing. And I think this is what we have ways to share that I hope we can continue to help promote and really go far.
I'm going to give you a slightly difficult task.
Okay.
I want you to keep Sangeetha's humility to one side, because that's who you are, and look at Sangeetha's way of solving the problem and saying, that's Sangeetha's way of doing it. How would that look like?
I think that for me, solving problems always is about trying to understand context. Context is everything. And I feel like sometimes it's not even a question of humility. It's a question of knowing that people have been here for, thousands of years, let alone, even decades, and that really my work is about ensuring that I listen to as many voices as possible and ultimately then do make decisions, but that I take that time, right? And so if I know that, there are gap areas in a state, or if there are challenges that are need, leveraging from the private sector, then it behooves me to listen to, partners that are on the ground, to beneficiaries that are actually being impacted by the services we're trying to deliver, or even ultimately, of course, to the government of India. Because unless we have true partnership and we're owning how we're going to go about solving challenges or even aligning with a greater vision, then we're lost and just doing things in silos. So my approach to solving problems is about that, about trying to be grounded in the context.
And consult.
Exactly. And then, of course, work together on solutions and make decisions so that we're not, ultimately just ineffective, and then be accountable.
Right. So it's context, it's construction of a solution with the stakeholders, and then collaboration.
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Sangeetha, I'm always curious about women leaders.
Yes.
And for me, I think I've been very sort of inspired by how grounded you are. She was talking about humility. But I think to be where you are, and I'm just curious because of what you've just shared with us in terms of everything that you do, would you be able to tell us, perhaps from Pakistan where you were previously to in India, in your personal leadership style, what's changed in the way you actually deal with the work that you do, the wicked problems or the teams, etc.? Have you seen a change in the last few years, and what would that be?
I definitely see a lot of changes. I mean, I started off in the Foreign Service. My first assignment was Namibia, right? And from there it was Armenia, then Zambia, then Pakistan, now India. And in between, I also supported countries in the former Soviet Union. And so in all of these experiences, I would be remiss to say I haven't grown as a leader. And growing can be positive. It can also be negative, right? What I've learned, especially in this last, several years of growth, it's been about the importance of, staying connected and not burning out, right? And I think that especially during the COVID pandemic, I think to, frontline responders, like healthcare providers, community health officers, anganwadis, social workers, just all manner of individuals at the last line that have continued to respond. In many ways, I feel like my team and we were all sort of like in our world in programming resources, we were first responders. We were trying to figure out how to quickly work with the government, and now we're trying to figure out how to continue to work and transition. But I feel like in that struggle, right, you in your mind start to, prioritize. And in a way, when there was an emergency, you worked in an emergency mode. And in some cases, it was hard to transition out of that emergency mode. And so I feel like, the 24/7, put your health, your wellness aside, work nonstop, a lot of these things were part and parcel of how we managed, how we coped. And I think now we're easing back to, back to work, to transitioning to normal hours, although I don't know. I've never seen normal hours, right? But still,
that's another commonality.
Yes.
Right. I feel like that transition in leadership and management is often difficult. And for me, it's been difficult because I always have this intrinsic, wish to do the best. And of course, because I'm from India, right? For me, it's more than just activities. These are programs that impact my people, right? So then for me, it's about, trying to ensure as a leader that I get back to that balance. And I think that's why, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was, I was reminded by a colleague last evening itself to reconnect to that balance. Otherwise we can't continue to lead,
And I think that's very powerful because, again, with you, I was talking about journeys of, I think we've seen certain styles of leadership and we experience it. And I think clearly there is a trend to look for alternatives. And I think what women bring to that, and for you to perhaps also touch upon, I had this interesting conversation with you where we said that I find that a lot of women deal with guilt about, especially in leadership, with striking this balance.
Yes.
It's not just about balance within the work, but generally in life. Yes. And how you navigated that, or your thoughts in that, and I think that probably would be inspirational for other women as well.
Well, thank you for asking that. I don't know if I'm the best example, but I think that it's often hard. It's difficult, right? Because you think of the dual burden, often placed on women, whether it's what is perceived to be their role in society, how they should be in the workplace, or even that role in coming home and being a mother. And so I share all of those roles. And so my messaging has always been to partner, to be able to, know that there's a time and place where, where you may need to do one thing before the other, but to ensure that you find a balance. Because to focus too much in one area to the detriment of the other will obviously lead to a situation of inequity, and also of you not showing up as a real person, either in your home, in your personal life with your friends and family, or even in the workplace. And I think that message that I would give is just to, it is a real struggle. To know it when it happens and to act on it is important, right? And I think that that's what I strive to do. I strive to role model, but I encourage even others to do as well. And I think that has come into play, especially from that journey as a Foreign Service officer in those leadership roles, and then even throughout the pandemic. And I wonder, has my experience been any different as a woman than if I were a male leader, for instance? I don't know that it would have, because I also feel like, I've been blessed to have a spouse who's also a Foreign Service officer now. And when he was sent, he was supporting me as well as my children while I was, working on my career. Now that he's pursuing his career, I've asked my parents and even his parents to support me. And so what's incredible is that extended family. So the multiculturalism plays in, but I think that really if we know that we can partner and that we're in a good place to ask for help and to seek help ourselves as well when it comes to wellness and balance, I think we'll be in a better position.
I think very wise words, Sangeetha.
A little bit of a rapid fire.
Okay.
One word answers.
Okay.
What frustrates you?
Bureaucracy.
What thrills you?
Adventure.
What makes you cry?
Inequity.
I could almost feel what you say.
Yeah. I really feel it. I feel, and Shiv, you've inspired me through the work of, the COVID Action Collaborative. But when you've been able to, reach communities such as, transgender and LGBTQI plus communities, and you're able to actually change people's lives, it makes such a difference, because it's not about numbers.
Right.
It's about some incredible human beings who are now able to contribute back to society, who now have a place, have dignity. And for me, it means a lot to be able to work with partners such as yourself to do that. Thank you.
And that's the story we have around us today.
It's so true.
As we're surrounded by these people who not only inspire us but also, give us that energy.
Yeah.
that this inequity is solvable.
Yes.
I want you to talk a little bit about the people who had a huge influence. You mentioned the coach, Sanjay.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about people in your family or in your career who were a big influence and who were very instrumental in some of your thought processes?
Oh, I would definitely say I've been inspired by my entire family, of course, from my children, to my parents, to my husband, as well as my mother-in-law. I mean, these are people that I connect to on a daily basis who, I am able to bounce ideas off of, who often talk about what they're learning, what they're experiencing, and really for me it's been about that connect, because you show up as a person based on what you're experiencing in your personal life, but also based on, how you can carry those qualities forward even in your work. And I think integrally there are certain fundamental values that we have shared in growing up together, in going through challenges together that are deeply rooted and remain ingrained in how I like to show up in my work and in the work that we ultimately do to impact others. So I guess that I'm just a simple person with an incredible family.
Wonderful. I studied in Gujarat, and we all in India like to stereotype every typology of communities. And when I think of Shama is already smiling. When I grew up in Gujarat, one of the things which hit me is the conviviality, the sense of community.
Yeah.
Even in a train, if you were to sit down, people will feed you all the time. It doesn't matter if you're being a South Indian, I don't even like to share food with anybody, right? And the frugality, when I go to some of the villages in Gujarat, the simplicity of it, and the funniness of what we call as the Patel shot when we go to tourist places.
Yes.
So how do you deal with these stereotypes to your advantage also sometimes?
I mean, I think I've faced them in every walk, when I've grown up and even in the work that I've done. I mean, at an earliest age in Madagascar,
Right.
The community was a Gujarati community. So I learned Malagasy and Sakalava, which were the local dialects through Peace Corps. And then, I also spoke French from my training. And then, of course, Gujarati. So everyone was confused. They're like, what are you? Are you American? Are you Indian? Are you Malagasy? What are you? And, part of that is just, I feel like if there's anything incredible about the Gujarati and even Indian spirit, it's that spirit of, of collaboration, of partnership, of just being able to, be industrial, right? And to always find solutions. Like, honestly, I feel like whether it's here in India or whether it's in the United States or other countries that I've been in, I've never met, an Indian community that isn't hardworking, that isn't willing to take even the bare minimum and use it and turn their situation around. Like, I feel like as a culture, we value resources and we value the next generation. And so I feel like fundamentally these are areas that whether I'm, looking at Gujarati or even South Indian, because I'm married into both, right? What I find is that it's still that same resourcefulness with humility, with giving back, because unless you give back, you can't basically close that cycle of what has come to you,
I think we were on talking about the future generation, and this is something that Shiv had also brought up earlier. What would be a message that you'd like to give young people today who are thinking about the social impact sector or the development space, fighting inequity, right? I think what would you want to give as a message to young people?
I guess I would take my inspiration even from some of the programs that I have seen that we've supported working with youth, but I feel like, it's so important for youth to get an education, to, because it's like the building block to ultimately allowing them to be global citizens and contribute back to the world that they live in. And for youth here especially, what I'm so proud of really is, from the Prime Minister on down, there is that understanding that children must be educated, especially of course the girl child, But I feel like my message would be keep pursuing that education and your dreams, continue to, to obviously learn and to grow as that global citizen. Pursue as many opportunities as you can, I think as well from my development perspective, to be citizens of the community as well, to understand and have a reality context so that as you're learning and growing in your education and in your, life's ambitions, you also have a connection back to some challenge that you're trying to help solve as part of a community. And I think that will serve you well. It did for me, and I hope it inspires a future generation of socially conscious, development-minded individuals.
And for those who look at social or the development sector as not a potential career path, right? I think today a lot of people, young people especially, look at and say, oh, the private sector is where we can make money, make a life, but
Sure.
not this. Anything additionally you want to tell them?
I would say follow your dreams, right? I mean, it could be the private sector, and it might be through the private sector that you are able to find solutions to renewable energy, right? There are so many different ways, public, private, entrepreneurial, where you can look at being a global citizen and look at finding ways to solve wicked challenges, right? And it takes each person to understand, be educated, and ultimately to figure out ways that they'll be able to be true to themselves and also be true to society in which they live in, But I think that my advice would be to still pursue private sector. There's no reason. There's not one thing is not better than the other. But it's also to kind of look back at who are you as a person? What do you want to do to contribute back to the world that you live in? And, going back to what you said, that passion for people, for the planet, for climate, how do you find ways to make that happen? So I think if you can do that, and if youth think like that, then they'll be able to partner even with the older generation that might have committed some of the atrocities, in terms of waste and in terms of some of the wicked challenges,
What's your feeling right now? And what are you taking away from this conversation?
I'm feeling really happy. I mean, I'm taking away from this conversation that sense of hope. I'm inspired, first of all, by the room that we are in, right? And I'm inspired by the faces on these various posters that have been created to represent those first responders, ultimately, that were able to take a small amount and run with that and be able to help their communities. So for me, whether it is, working with you or working with other partners or individuals, I'm inspired by that hope that there are more like us out there that want to, in the end, make the world a better place.
So I'm going to borrow some of the words that you mentioned just now. Socially conscious, development-minded professionals. Who would you nominate that we both interview next time around in the Wicked Solutions?
I think I would definitely nominate Sanjay Jaganti.
Sanjay Jaganti.
Yes.
Who's been a huge influence in terms of being a coach.
Absolutely. He's an incredible leadership coach, and I think I'm probably not the only person that's benefited from his guidance. So.
Wonderful. We will convince him together.
I think so. I think we have to.
And we have to have fun with him too.
Exactly.
Getting to know him better.
Exactly. In Chennai.
All right. Thank you so much, Sangeetha.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure having you on the show. And the work that you do is so important. And, all the very best. All the time in the world for you to do your pranayama and yoga, to be always centered and always smiling as you do. Thank you so much for joining us. And Shama, thank you for joining me in this interview.
Such a pleasure to be speaking with both of you always. So,
And thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.